everyone and welcome to a Tea Time with Chloe. I've got a Walt Disney World mug here. This is the first Tea Time with Chloe that I've done in a really long time and the first video that I've done in really quite a long time. I know that not everyone follows me on Instagram, so I wanted to come on and just say hi and explain where I've been for the last couple of months. I probably should have had a look at my last weekly vlog before I started filming this because I can't remember what you guys actually know, so I'm just going to start from the beginning. But before I do start, I've got the back door open and the dogs are going in and out, and because of the current world situation, which I'll also touch on in this video, Will is working from home, so if you hear noises in the background, it's the dogs, it's Will, you know, everything's crazy at the moment. So let's just start from the beginning, shall we? So I think that I uploaded a weekly vlog in January saying that I wasn't feeling well. People were noticing that I was losing weight. I was just really pale and like grey. I had no energy and I felt terrible. So I had been to the doctors and they had done some blood tests, and I was really deficient in like B12, vitamin D, all that sort of thing, and mildly anemic. So they put me on a course of B12 injections, vitamin D tablets, another multivitamin, just all sorts of supplements to try and boost me up. And then unfortunately I got a chest infection, so then I was on antibiotics and that knocked me even more. And then we went to Florida. And in hindsight, I have no idea how I managed to go to Florida. And if you've watched the vlogs, you'll know that it wasn't like the best trip in the world. I was really poorly, I couldn't eat. It was interesting. But I went to Florida, and then when I came back, I completely crashed. And it was 2 weeks after we had come back from Florida, and I just wasn't getting any better. So I went to my GP and I demanded some blood tests, because I just wasn't feeling any better. If anything, I was feeling worse, and I had no energy to do anything. My pulse was skyrocketing to like 150, 160 beats per minute, even when I was just walking up the stairs. My pulse was actually, my heart was beating so hard and like so fast that if I tried to do anything like go up the stairs or whatever, my pulse would actually beat in my eyes. I could see like black spots pulsing in my eyes, and it would pound in my head, and I had a terrible headache every day, and it was just awful. And I also had what I would call Crohn's symptoms, so I couldn't eat, weight was falling off me, I lost about 2 stone in the end, and I had a really upset stomach. It was just awful. So I went to the doctors and I demanded some more blood tests. And after that, I went to my parents' house and I just sat with them. My mum had taken me for my blood test, so afterwards I just sat at her house, just laying on the couch under a blanket, unable to do anything. And Will came to pick me up because I couldn't even drive myself home. And all of a sudden I got a phone call. And it was a doctor, and he said, the hospital lab have just called us directly. You are so dangerously anemic that your heart could give out, and you need to go to the hospital right now and have an emergency blood transfusion. And I was petrified, but you know, I jumped in the car with Will and we went up to the hospital, and I won't like go into like every single detail of everything that happened, but we waited for a while. I had a cannula put in, they asked me lots of questions, I had more blood taken so they could do all the same tests again, just to confirm everything and make sure that it wasn't like a fluke or anything. And I didn't get admitted onto a ward until midnight, and it was just like almost like a halfway house kind of ward. So like you come in from the A&E department, you get assessed and everything, and then if you need immediate treatment and you're not going to like a proper ward straight away, they'll put you on this ward. So I got admitted there at midnight. So just to go backwards for some context in case people don't know, but I'm sure most of you do, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2002 and when I was 8, and generally the way my Crohn's has always been treated is that I've been on immunosuppressants. So I've been on a few different treatments in the past, but generally they suppress your immune system because the problem is your immune system attacking the wrong thing. In my case, like my whole digestive system. So they suppress your immune system to try and control your Crohn's, and the medication that I was currently on was mercaptopurine. I had switched to mercaptopurine from some injections that I was on in September because the injections were giving me horrible side effects. I was covered in eczema, my hair was all falling out, and with the wedding coming up I didn't want those side effects anymore, so I switched back to mercaptopurine, which I had been on before with no issues. That's like an important thing to know. I had been on this medication before with no problems. So that's a little bit of context for you. At the time I was taking immunosuppressants for my Crohn's disease. Going back to the 6th of March, I was admitted onto this ward and they decided to do an iron infusion instead because they thought that it would be more effective, it's less risky than a blood transfusion. So I was given an iron transfusion through a cannula, through an IV. And within 2 minutes of them starting the infusion, I began to have a severe allergic reaction. My face swelled up, I couldn't breathe, and I started vomiting, and I felt like I was just going to pass out. So the crash team came running in, the anaphylaxis box came rushing in, they gave me oxygen. Thankfully I was okay. As soon as they stopped the infusion, the symptoms started going, thankfully. So they obviously couldn't do the iron infusion, so I was then just left overnight on that ward with no real idea of what was going on. The next morning, Will brought me up some supplies because obviously I hadn't been expecting to be admitted to hospital, and at this point I still thought it was going to be a really short stay, that I was going to have some sort of transfusion and be sent home. But I ended up being moved to the gastro ward, and the reason they moved me to the gastro ward was because everyone thought this was something to do with my Crohn's in the beginning. That there was some sort of absorption issue. I wasn't absorbing anything because I was having a Crohn's relapse, and that must be why I was so anemic. For reference, the normal levels of hemoglobin in your body are between, I think it's like 120 for women and sort of like up to 150 for men, and mine were 53. And they consider that like critical. If your levels are below 70, you possibly require a blood transfusion. Obviously mine were 53. And also my neutrophils, which are like white blood cells that fight infection, make up your immune system and everything, were at 0.85, which again is considered critical. But at the time no one had paid enough attention to that. So I was just moved up to a gastro ward as normal, and I spent a couple of days there. I had a bone marrow biopsy, which I won't go into detail about because I don't want to like frighten anyone who has to have one, but I was absolutely terrified to have it. And thankfully they offered me gas and air, and my mum was allowed to stay with me, so I got through it. I had my bone marrow biopsy, and that was when I started to get scared, because I am not silly. If they're looking at your bone marrow, they think there's something wrong with your blood or in your bone marrow. And the medications that I had been on for my Crohn's, the combination of medications, make you more likely to develop leukemia or certain types of lymphoma, including a very rare, nasty type of lymphoma that is highly fatal. And so I was terrified, basically. But I had my bone marrow biopsy. It was going to be a while until the results came in, so I just had to try and put that out of my mind as best I could. My family visited me, my friends visited me. 3 days after I went into hospital, I was moved into my own room on the gastro ward because I was so vulnerable to infection, because they realised that my white blood cells were so critically low. I need tea. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but the whole time I was in hospital for those first 3 days, I cried all day. Every time someone visited me, every time a doctor spoke to me, every time a nurse spoke to me, every time I thought of the dogs, I just sobbed, cried and cried and cried and cried. It was ridiculous. I just couldn't settle at all. I was so homesick. I couldn't believe I was having to stay in hospital. When they started to think that I had some sort of blood disorder, or they were testing for these cancers and things, they were saying to me that I could potentially be looking at a really long stay in hospital, and that just terrified me. So I was so upset. And then when they moved me to my side room, I was able to relax a lot more because I felt like I had privacy, and I don't know, it just made me feel so much better. I had privacy. I could watch things on my tablet without bothering anyone, like not needing headphones. I had my own space. I couldn't hear all of the noise of the nurses' station constantly and everything. And I don't want to bash anyone, but being totally honest, that was not a nice ward to be on. It was not very clean. The toilets were disgusting. And a lot of the nurses were not very nice, and I know this is not, like, I'll probably get a lot of flack in the comments for saying that, but I did not have a good experience on that ward, and it was not fun. But thankfully I was only there for 3 days. Well, I was in that side room for 3 days, and then I was moved again. I was moved to the haematology and oncology ward, and let me tell you, when someone says that they're moving you to the haematology and oncology ward, you're frightened, because that's, again, blood disorders, cancer, and I was frightened. I was moved to my own side room with my own bathroom. That was one of the main reasons that I was moved, because I was having to share the ward toilets and shower room with the rest of the gastro ward. And I was so prone to infection. I was having to wear a mask every time I left my room to go to the toilet. And like I said, the toilets were really dirty. I went in there and there was sick or poo or bowls of wee waiting to be collected and weighed every time I went in the toilet. And that was just not ideal when somebody is really at risk. So I was moved up to the haematology ward because they realised that this wasn't something to do with my Crohn's. It was something to do with my blood or my bone marrow. And my initial bone marrow biopsy, the liquid part, came back with no abnormalities apart from a complete lack of the cells that are meant to be in that bone marrow. So my bone marrow wasn't working, and then they needed to figure out why. And the rest of the results wouldn't come back for a long time. I'm filming this on the 26th of March, and I actually only got those results yesterday. So they took a long time to come back. But at least that first part came back relatively quickly, and I felt a lot better, knowing that there wasn't anything obviously sinister in my bone marrow. So they started to think that it was my medication for my Crohn's disease that was causing bone marrow suppression or bone marrow failure, because it was suppressing my immune system so much, it had just stopped my bone marrow from working altogether. And that's what everyone seemed to think it was. So I spent 4 days on the haematology ward, and it was like a different world from where I had been before. Every member of staff was an absolute delight. The nurses, the cleaners, the porters, the people who did the food, everyone was absolutely amazing. The doctors were amazing. One of them in particular, I'm going to get her a card and a gift and send it to the hospital because she was just fantastic. And they obviously stopped my medication and everything, and then they monitored my blood every single day. I did end up having 2 blood transfusions the first weekend I was in hospital, and that helped give me a little bit of a boost. And they obviously took me off the mercaptopurine, and then it was just a waiting game to see if my blood started to improve, if my blood counts started to improve, and if my bone marrow started to recover. If it's going to recover, that normally happens within 2 weeks. So I sort of had it in my head that I was going to be in hospital for another 2 weeks. And honestly, even though it was really hard, I could have managed another 2 weeks if I had stayed on that ward in that room, because they were so lovely, and I had my own space and I had my own toilet and shower and everything, and it was okay once I was in there. But I had blood drawn every single day to check. I had several cannulas put in and out. I was on IV antibiotics at one point because they thought I was getting an infection, because obviously they measure your temperature and everything. every couple of hours when you're in hospital. They thought I was getting an infection at one point, so I was on IV antibiotics, and then they changed it to oral antibiotics. Honestly, they gave me so much stuff and I just took it. But obviously with the coronavirus outbreak and the fact that I was on a ward with very vulnerable people, there was talk that they were going to ban all visitors, and I had a bit of a breakdown because the fact that my mum and my fiance were able to visit me and bring me food, because I didn't eat much of the hospital food at all, and bring me things to do and just chat with me and keep me company. That was the only thing keeping me going. Thankfully they did make an exception in the end and said I could have one visitor at a time. So Will would come up and then my mum would come up, they would swap, or the other way around. There was never a day when no one visited me, and I'm so appreciative of that. It was honestly the only thing keeping me going. But by the beginning of last week, my blood counts had started to improve, and I'd been having injections to try and stimulate my bone marrow, which gave me terrible back spasms. They were horrendous. Thankfully they've all gone now because I'm not having those injections anymore. And I came close to having to have another blood transfusion a couple of times, but they held off. And yeah, by the beginning of last week I had started to show enough improvement to be discharged, because they needed the room, and they needed as many beds free as possible, honestly, because they were expecting coronavirus patients to start coming in, and that is what happened. I kind of got out of the hospital at the exact right time, to be honest, because the outbreak began in our area. I actually live in the county that's got the largest amount of cases, so our hospital is pretty full of coronavirus patients now. So I did get out sort of at the right time, because when I left hospital I was still incredibly vulnerable, and I still have to wear a mask now if I have to go out to an appointment. But yesterday was my last blood test that I have to have for the foreseeable, because they obviously want to limit people's visits to the hospital. And my hemoglobin, my white blood cells, my platelets, everything have all come right up. Some of them are even in the normal zone. My white blood cells are now sort of slap bang in the middle of the normal zone, so I have like a little bit of an immune system now to fight coronavirus if I'm exposed to it. Fingers crossed I'm not, but yeah, I'm really happy with my blood test results, and I feel very lucky because it could have been so much worse. Yesterday I finally got the bone marrow biopsy results back, like the rest of the results, and it was all totally normal. So there was nothing hematologically wrong, or no cancer, nothing. It was just my medication. My medication was killing me, basically. They did say to me if I hadn't asked my GP for those blood tests that day, I probably wouldn't have made it to the end of the next week. So it's a very sobering thought, really. But that brings me to now. Obviously the UK is on lockdown now. 25% of the world's population is actually on some form of lockdown right now because of the coronavirus, or COVID-19. And some days are really hard because I can't go out to the supermarket to get food or anything like that, because I'm still considered vulnerable. Even if I hadn't have been poorly and just discharged from hospital, my Crohn's puts me on the vulnerable list, so I can't like nip out to the supermarket to get food. So Will, bless him, is having to do it all, and he has been my rock over the last couple of weeks with everything that's been going on. He's been amazing, like more so than I ever could have expected, and so has my mum. And I'm very appreciative of them. And one thing I will say is, date the funny guy, the one who makes you laugh, because you never know when you're going to be quarantined together. And we have not had one single argument. we don't really argue anyway, but we've not had one single argument because we just get on really well, and we're both sort of doing our own thing. He's working from home, I'm down here like pottering about the house or whatever now that I feel a bit better. And yeah, date the funny guy. Yeah, I went off on a bit of a tangent then, but I'm obviously very scared about contracting the virus, so I am following advice and staying at home. I'm not going to supermarkets or anything like that. I've only been out once, and it was to go for my blood test, and I won't be going out again. I think maybe in another week or so I might feel well enough to take the dogs around the block. But yeah, other than that, I won't be going anywhere for the foreseeable. The wedding is a bit up in the air at the moment. We don't know whether it's going to be happening, but we're holding off cancelling or postponing at the moment because things might be different by August. Archie's barking at something. So keep your fingers crossed for us for the wedding, please, because a lot of love and money has gone into that and I really want it to go ahead. What else? Yes. I just wanted to say these are crazy times. 2020 has not been good to me or my family so far, and it's not really been good to anyone now that we've got this pandemic causing us problems. We're all feeling a bit weird, and please don't put pressure on yourself to feel positive or grateful every day. That's just unrealistic. I feel generally okay most days, but for example yesterday I had a terrible morning and I just cried all morning because I was so frustrated and angry and upset, and that is allowed. We're allowed to feel like that. Let yourself feel whatever you feel and then move on from it. We're all just doing our best, and things are crazy right now, and if you need anyone to chat to, my comments are always here, my DMs are always open on Instagram, and yeah. And just before I go, I wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who sent me lovely messages while I was in hospital. I felt so supported while I was there. If I posted on Instagram, I got so many responses from people just wishing me well and trying to keep my spirits up and keeping their fingers crossed for me, because it was really scary for a while. We didn't know what my results and everything were going to be. We didn't know if my bone marrow was going to recover. I've been very lucky. Some people don't recover from this and they die because it's a fatal condition. If your bone marrow doesn't work, your body doesn't work. I know that better than anyone. The first couple of months of this year were horrendous, and I don't know how I functioned. I don't know how I still went to work for a lot of it. I don't know how I went to Florida. I don't know how I did any of it. But I feel so lucky that I'm recovering, and I'm recovering faster than they could have ever expected as well. I feel so much better. So yeah, also speaking of which, I did film a haul video when we got home from Florida, which I still want to upload because I want to show you what I bought, but I look very, very poorly in that video. So that might be the next video that you see, and I just wanted to warn you, like, before it goes up, that I look really poorly in the video, but it was filmed weeks ago before I went into hospital, and not to worry about me, because now I look like this, I look like a human again, and I'm doing so much better. So when that video goes up, please don't worry. That was filmed weeks ago, and I will put a note at the beginning of that video as well, just explaining that it was filmed a while ago and that I'm doing much better now. But yeah, I really hope you're all well. Stay safe, stay home, look after your friends and family via video chat. Help the vulnerable and the elderly if you can, but don't put yourself at risk. We're all just doing our best. I'll see you next time. Bye.